Realizing that you're about to be locked away for a long time is usually devastating for most offenders, but not these guys. These individuals, devoid of empathy, shock even the most seasoned judges and lawyers with their brazen indifference to the consequences of their heinous acts. From the craziest murderer who ruthlessly killed her 6-month-old baby to the unrepentant masterminds. In this video, we're about to unravel 20 stories of scariest convicts who showed no remorse in court. Number 20, William George Davis. Between 2017 and 2018, William George worked as a nurse at Christus Trinity Mother Frances Hospital in Texas, specifically in the recovery room of the operating department. However, his time there was marred by suspicion and tragedy. Doctors became concerned when a pattern emerged. Patients would unexpectedly fall ill following heart surgeries, and each of these patients passed away after William had been the last medical professional to interact with them. Security footage added to the suspicion, showing William entering the patients' rooms just before their deaths. In a chilling revelation, William confessed to his former spouse over the phone, admitting to a sinister method he used to keep patients unwell to prolong his overtime earnings. Christopher Greenway, Joseph Kalina, Ronald Clark, and John Lafferty were among the victims of William's actions. He was arrested, tried, and subsequently convicted of their murders. Despite receiving a death sentence, William remained stoic and maintained his innocence, claiming that he never intended to harm his patients. Currently, William is confined to death row, where he awaits his fate. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, he continues to deny his guilt. The jury, however, took only 2 hours to reach their verdict in this chilling case. Number 19, Stephen Griffiths. From 2009 to 2019, a chilling series of events unfolded in Yorkshire, England, as Stephen Griffiths took the lives of several adult industry workers. His early years were shaped by a disturbing fascination with notorious mass murderers, a passion he pursued academically by studying criminology and writing his PhD on the subject. Sadly, his twisted fantasies turned into horrific actions, carried out with a chilling and unusual choice of weapon, a powerful crossbow. After each murder, Griffiths would brazenly taunt CCTV cameras. He believed he was cleansing his community by targeting prostitutes, echoing the twisted logic of Gary Ridgway. When investigators searched his home, they found books detailing the dismemberment of human bodies. During his trial, Griffiths showed no remorse for his crimes. Instead, he exhibited a disturbing sense of pride, even giving himself the nickname, the Crossbow Cannibal. In court, he made little effort to defend himself, quickly pleading guilty, leading to a swift trial process. Number 18, Jeremy Christian. In May 2017, Jeremy Christian was arrested for the murder of 2 men on a Max Light Rail train in Portland, Oregon. He stabbed and killed 53-year-old retired Army officer Ricky John Best and 23-year-old Talisin Namkai Mechi. He also stabbed 21-year-old Micah Fletcher, who survived. The incident began when Christian was captured on tape screaming anti-Muslim and racist slurs at 2 black teenagers. Passengers, disturbed by his behavior, confronted him and shielded the frightened teenagers. Despite attempts to calm the situation, Christian brandished a knife, threatening and eventually stabbing the victims. After his 12-second outburst of violence, Christian fled the train at the next transit center. Several passengers followed him while calling 911, leading to his eventual arrest. In court, Christian showed no remorse for his actions and even threatened a victim's relative. During the trial, evidence of Christian's criminal past emerged, including an assault on a woman and shouting racial slurs on a train the day before the murders. He identified as a white nationalist and far-right extremist. Christian was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms plus 25 years for his crimes. The judge and jury were shocked by his lack of remorse and the extent of his violence. The tragic event highlighted the dangers of hate and extremism in society. Number 17, Jesse Pomeroy. Few criminals in American history are as puzzling as Jesse Pomeroy. His first violent acts happened when he was just 11 to 12 years old, between 1871 and 1872. During this time, his neighborhood was terrorized by brutal attacks on young children. Even after moving, his disturbing behavior continued, leading to his capture. Because he was so young, Jesse was sent to a facility for troubled youth, but was later allowed to return home at 14. This was just the start of his dark story. After being released, Jesse's sinister behavior returned, but with a horrifying twist. There were reports of missing children, and sadly their remains were found in places like his mother's dress shop basement. Jesse was arrested again, and faced a trial where both the judge and prosecutor were determined to ensure he never went free. He was sentenced to life in prison. In prison, Jesse showed no remorse and was incredibly smart. He taught himself foreign languages out of boredom and even tried to escape several times, though he was never successful. He died in prison from a heart attack, ending a life marked by violence and darkness. Number 16. Sierra Halth. Sierra Halth faced serious charges, including murder, arson, and conspiracy, on April 9, 2021. Her father, Daniel Halth, was tragically found dead in his Las Vegas home's garage, set on fire and stabbed over 70 times. Sierra, just 16 years old, was also missing. She was the daughter of her father's ex-wife, former U.S. Senator Elizabeth Hegelian. Police were concerned that whoever killed Daniel had taken Sierra. 4 days later, Sierra was discovered in Salt Lake City, Utah, with her boyfriend, Aaron Guerrero. A shocking video on her phone showed the pair laughing about the murder they committed, and investigators found evidence of a shopping spree they had taken with Daniel's credit card the day before his death, buying items that were later found covered in his blood. Sierra and Aaron both pleaded guilty to avoiding the death penalty. At the sentencing, Sierra showed no remorse, blaming her father for her actions and describing him in a derogatory manner. Aaron, on the other hand, apologized sincerely for his role in the crime. During the victim impact statement, Daniel's family expressed their deep pain and anger. They believed that both Sierra and Aaron deserved the death penalty, but had to settle for life in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Sierra's family disowned her, and Daniel's gravestone now includes the names of his other children, indicating their rejection of Sierra's actions. The case of Sierra Halth is a tragic example of how a young person's life can spiral out of control, leading to devastating consequences for everyone involved. Number 15. Richard Ramirez. In the scorching summer of 1985, Richard Ramirez unleashed a reign of terror across Southern California, leaving a trail of fear and horror in his wake. Hailing from Texas, Ramirez, later dubbed the Night Stalker, committed a series of brutal acts including beating, raping, strangling, shooting, and slashing the throats of his victims. He attributed his heinous spree to a twisted devotion to Satan. What made Ramirez's reign of terror even more horrifying was the sheer brutality of his crimes. In addition to the gruesome methods mentioned, he also practiced disturbing rituals at some crime scenes, such as leaving satanic symbols and even drawing pentagrams on walls with his victims' blood. Despite efforts by law enforcement to track him down, Ramirez remained elusive for months, instilling a sense of helplessness and unease in the community. It wasn't until a failed carjacking attempt and subsequent mob capture that Ramirez's reign of terror came to an end. During his trial, Ramirez's demeanor was as chilling as his crimes. He openly flaunted his allegiance to Satan and showed no remorse for the lives he had taken. His courtroom antics and bizarre statements further cemented his reputation as a depraved and unrepentant killer. Found guilty of 13 murders and 30 other crimes, Ramirez faced the prospect of the gas chamber. His demeanor remained cold and unrepentant as he delivered a bone-chilling speech. "You can't comprehend me. It's beyond your grasp. I exist beyond conventional notions of morality. Revenge will be mine. The influence of Lucifer resides within us all. That's the crux of it." Number 14. Camia Gamut. Camia Gamut, 31, was on trial for the murder of her boyfriend, Marcel Hill, 38, in Michigan. In May 2018, a violent incident occurred where Gamut attacked Hill in a fit of rage, causing extensive damage to their apartment and using various items as weapons. When the police arrived, responding to calls from neighbors, they found Hill dead and Gamut covered in blood. Among the items recovered were a bloody frying pan, a knife, and a smashed floor lamp. Prosecutors revealed that Hill had been stabbed multiple times with the knife. During the trial, Gamut claimed she believed Hill was an intruder and acted in self-defense. However, this defense was refuted, as evidence showed she had stabbed him 12 times and hit him repeatedly with the frying pan. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Gamut maintained her innocence, claiming she was a victim of lies. In court, the victim's family delivered impact statements. Hill's mother's statement was particularly chilling, expressing the pain of losing her son. Despite this, Gamut showed no remorse and even smiled and rolled her eyes during the proceedings. In response to her disruptive behavior, the judge threatened to tape her mouth shut. Ultimately, Gamut was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, reflecting on the severity of her actions, expressed a wish for her to die in prison, highlighting the court's consideration of her history of domestic abuse. Number 13. John and Samantha Allen. In July 2011, authorities in Phoenix received a distressing report about the death of a young girl. Their investigation led them to Judith Deal's residence, where Cynthia Stoltzman, Samantha Allen, and John Allen also lived. Samantha and John were married. Cynthia was Samantha's mother, and Judith was the homeowner. The victim, Judith's granddaughter, was found dead in a small trunk, apparently suffocated. Samantha and John, who were cousins, were responsible for her death. They subjected her to cruel punishments, including physically demanding activities and confinement in the trunk. Initially, they claimed it was a result of a game of hide and seek, but this was quickly disproven. The evidence showed that the young girl had been forcibly placed inside the trunk as punishment for taking a popsicle without permission. Sadly, she had suffered from neglect and malnourishment throughout her life. Samantha and John were sentenced to death for their roles in the tragedy. John's reaction in court was emotional, breaking down in tears, while Samantha maintained their actions were driven by familial loyalty. Despite this, she advocated for a lesser punishment due to John's more direct involvement in placing the girl in the trunk. The case revealed a disturbing pattern of abuse and neglect in the household, leading to legal repercussions for the other adults involved. Number 12. Randall Moore. On November 11, 2009, Teresa Ann Lynch, a 31-year-old U.S. veteran who had served 3 tours overseas, finished her dental appointment and headed to the Merle Hay Mall in West Des Moines, Iowa. Unbeknownst to her, she was being followed by her estranged husband, Randall Moore. When she returned to her car, Randall blocked her in and forcibly pushed her headfirst into his vehicle before driving off. Teresa Ann had been married to Randall for less than a year before she sought help from her family to escape the abusive marriage. They picked her up from work, and she and her 6-month-old son moved in with her aunt. Teresa Ann bore bruises on her face, arms, neck, and back, along with several rug burns, evidence of the abuse she endured. Days later, during a supervised visit with their child, Randall displayed concerning behavior, pacing around the aunt's house and making ominous statements. He kidnapped Teresa Ann, taking her back to their apartment where he tied her up. He then retrieved his 12-gauge shotgun and, despite her pleas, shot her twice in the face. Des Moines officers responded to the scene, and one of them, Officer Todd Rowland, was shot in the hand by Randall. Randall eventually surrendered after threatening to kill himself. Randall's trial began a year later, and he was found guilty on all 4 charges. Despite the verdict, Randall showed no remorse. He interrupted Teresa Ann's mother as she read her victim impact statement, making callous and self-centered remarks. In November 12, 2010, Randall was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms plus 25 years for the attempted murder of Officer Rowland. The courtroom was filled with tears of relief from Teresa Ann's family, contrasting with Randall's cold and unemotional demeanor. Number 11. Keith Ferguson. Keith Ferguson faced serious charges, including 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of first-degree home invasion, and wearing body armor during a violent crime. In September 2014, his wife, Tiffany Ferguson, filed for divorce, citing their differences. Tiffany, a mother of 4 and a pillar in the community for her work with the Youth Hockey Association, felt that Keith's behavior, such as breaking her glasses and invading her privacy, was driving them apart. The day before their scheduled divorce hearing on November 18th, Keith committed a horrific act. He armed himself with multiple firearms, explosives, and body armor, then shot Tiffany 3 times in front of their young children, aged 3 to 13, at their home in Cold Springs Township. He then took the children to their grandfather's home, where he shot Tiffany's father, James Weber, in front of them. The terrified children ran to neighbors for help, one of whom was a sheriff's deputy, who called 911. Keith then took a hostage and barricaded himself in another location for 7 hours, spouting military terms. He eventually surrendered. During his court appearances, Keith was disruptive, flipping off the judge and swearing. In March 2015, he pleaded guilty to the murders in exchange for dropping other charges. At sentencing, Keith's behavior was subdued as he listened to Tiffany's friends speak. However, the judge was not convinced of his change and sentenced him to life in prison without parole. Keith's actions shocked the community and the court, especially his outbursts and lack of remorse. His children were left without a mother and with a father who showed little regard for the consequences of his actions. Number 10. Lowell Lee Andrews. On November 28, 1958, Lowell Lee Andrews was found guilty of brutally murdering his parents and sister. His sentence was carried out on November 30, 1962, through hanging. Andrews, a zoology major who played the bassoon in the college band, hid disturbing thoughts behind a facade of normalcy. He nurtured fantasies of poisoning his family and becoming a notorious gangster and assassin in Chicago. During Thanksgiving in 1958, Andrews and his sister Jenny Marie returned home. While his parents watched TV downstairs, Andrews read The Brothers Karamazov upstairs. He then groomed himself, dressed in a suit, and armed himself with a rifle and revolver. Entering his family's room, he opened fire, fatally shooting his sister first, followed by his parents. Despite being injured, his parents faced more shots. His father, trying to reach the kitchen, was shot 17 times. This chilling sequence of events reveals Andrews's calculated and brutal actions. It led to his eventual execution. Andrews's case is a stark reminder of how hidden darkness can lurk behind a seemingly ordinary facade. Number 9. Bryce Rhodes. Bryce Rhodes faced serious charges, including 3 counts of murder and terroristic threatening, stemming from a tragic incident on May 4, 2016. During a drive-by shooting, Bryce shot Christopher Jones, who was accompanied by brothers Maurice Gordon, 15, and Larry Ordway, 14. 3 weeks later, the bodies of the teenagers were discovered, stabbed, and burned behind a home in Louisville, Kentucky. Bryce committed these heinous acts after learning that one of the teenagers had informed his mother about what he had witnessed. When Bryce was arrested and charged with all 3 murders, his behavior in court was erratic and angry. He was brought in with a wheelchair and a spit mask to control him, but he continued to disrupt proceedings with outbursts and threats. While behind bars, Bryce continued to exhibit violent behavior, throwing urine at a correctional officer and attempting to assault another. His lawyer argued that he needed a competency test, but the victims' families were tired of his antics. After 2 years of assessments, Bryce was deemed competent to stand trial in April 2023. Ultimately, Bryce was found guilty by a Louisville jury on all 3 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His court case serves as a tragic reminder of the devastating consequences of violence and the importance of justice for the victims and their families. Number 8. Dennis Rader. The Dennis Rader case is infamous in American history, with Rader, who called himself BTK, meaning bind, torture, kill, being a notorious serial killer. Between 1974 and 1991, he murdered 10 people in Sedgwick County, Kansas. Despite his heinous acts, Rader managed to evade capture for over 3 decades until he resurfaced in 2004, leading to his arrest in 2005. During his trial, one of the most shocking aspects of Rader's behavior was his lack of remorse or emotion. He calmly described the gruesome details of his crimes, often using technical terms and acronyms. It seemed he enjoyed reliving his killings, showcasing his intelligence and cunning. Rader attempted to justify his actions by blaming his victims, his childhood, or his inner demons. Many observers and experts were appalled by Rader's lack of empathy and humanity, Some speculated that he suffered from severe personality disorders, such as narcissism or psychopathy. Others believed he was manipulating the court and the public by portraying himself as rational and cooperative. However, his cold and arrogant demeanor did not garner any sympathy or leniency. He was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for each of his 10 murders. Number 7. Ronnie ONeal III. In court for the double murder of his 9-year-old daughter, Ronnie ONeal, and 33-year-old girlfriend, Kenyatta Barron, in Riverview, Florida, on the evening of March 18, 2018, 29-year-old Ronnie fatally shot Barron and struck his daughter multiple times with an axe until she passed away. During the incident, Ronnie also stabbed his 8-year-old son, who survived. Barron had called 911 screaming before hanging up, and less than 10 minutes later, Ronnie called 911 claiming to be attacked by white demons and accused Barron of trying to kill him. Believing they were all dead, Ronnie poured gasoline into the house and set it on fire, but fortunately, his son was able to escape with burns and stab wounds. Ronnie was arrested after fleeing the scene. His trial began in 2021, where he insisted on representing himself. During the trial, Ronnie cross-examined his son, who had fully recovered from his injuries. Ronnie claimed his son lied about the events, insisting that the prosecution's evidence was forged. Ultimately, Ronnie was found guilty of 7 charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of aggravated child abuse. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences without the chance of parole. Judge Michelle Cisco, who has been in the judicial sector for almost 20 years, described it as the worst case she had ever seen. Number 6. Michael Brady. In October 2017, Michael Brady and fellow inmates at North Carolina's Pasquotank Correctional Institute orchestrated a plan to escape. Michael took the lead, rallying the others to break free at any cost. Almost exactly 2 years later, Michael faced a jury for the consequences of this escape attempt. During the breakout, 2 correctional officers, Wendy Shannon and Justin Smith, as well as prison employees Veronica Darden and Jeffrey Howe, tragically lost their lives. The district attorney described these victims not as human beings with families, but as obstacles to Michael's quest for freedom. Michael used a hammer's claw as his weapon of choice in these fatal attacks. While his defense tried to link his actions to childhood abuse, many people have faced trauma without resorting to violence. Michael's choices and character, unrelated to his past, led to these tragic events. Throughout the trial and sentencing, Michael remained calm and indifferent, reflecting a sense of calculated planning. The jury swiftly returned a verdict of the death penalty, echoing the sentiment that Michael's actions were a result of his own choices, rather than his history of abuse. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. This is one of the scariest convicts who showed no remorse in court. In a small town in South Jersey, a heartbreaking tragedy unfolded that shocked the community. It was the case of Christy Alcazar, a mother accused of a heinous crime, the murder of her 5-month-old daughter. Court documents revealed that Christy confessed to the crime, stating she stabbed her infant to fulfill her last sins, showing no remorse for her actions. The incident came to light when police responded to an open 911 call and found Christy arguing with someone in her home. Nearby, they discovered the lifeless body of her daughter, bearing visible stab wounds. Multiple knives and other evidence were recovered from the scene, painting a grim picture of the crime. Neighbors speculated that Christy may have been suffering from postpartum depression or psychosis, but the motive remains unclear. The father of the child was not home at the time of the incident, leaving Christy's 2 other children in the custody of Child Protective Services. Christy appeared in court, charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of possession of a weapon. She awaits a detention hearing, held at the Salem County Correctional Facility, as the community grapples with the tragic loss of a young life. What do you think should be her fate? Let us know in the comments below. Number 5. Michael Swanson. On November 15, 2010, 17-year-old Michael Swanson committed 2 horrific murders. Armed with a stolen handgun, he first entered a store in Iowa, wearing a mask, and fatally shot 61-year-old Sheila Myers, stealing $31 and some cigarettes. Just hours earlier, he had demanded cigarettes and money from another store clerk, 47-year-old Vicki Bellman Hall, before shooting her. His motive was not financial. He wanted to feel powerful and had even planned to kill his parents. In June 2011, Michael was found guilty of Sheila Meyer's murder and was sentenced to life in prison. During the trial, he showed no remorse, flipping off TV cameras and smiling. When Vicki Bowman Hall's daughter, Jillian Bellman, emotionally addressed the court, Michael started to smile again, prompting the judge to admonish him. In 2013, due to a Supreme Court ruling, Michael's life sentence was commuted to 60 years in prison. However, his troubles didn't end there. In a senseless act of violence in 2018, Michael, now 21, and another inmate attacked a fellow inmate with a makeshift knife, slashing his neck 15 times. As a result, Michael and his accomplice were sentenced to an additional 20 years in prison. Number 4, Gary Hilton. Gary Hilton, a 76-year-old man, has earned the chilling nickname of the National Forest Serial Killer for his sinister acts. He is now serving a life sentence, ensuring he will never see the outside world again. With 4 confirmed victims and a trail of suspected ones, Hilton has left a dark memory of terror. Among his confirmed victims were John and Irene Bryant, an elderly couple aged 84 and 80, who vanished during a trip to Pisgah National Forest. A widespread search eventually led to the discovery of Irene's remains, followed by fragments of John's body. Surveillance footage captured Hilton using John's debit card, linking him to the brutal killings. Cheryl Dunlap, a 46-year-old nurse from Florida State University, also met a tragic fate. Only fragmented remains were recovered, and Hilton was tied to the case through ATM activity. Images from an ATM camera showed a masked man using Dunlap's debit card. The pattern became evident, pointing to a possible serial killer. Hilton was also involved in the case of Meredith Emerson, who was hiking with her dog. Witnesses reported seeing Hilton trailing her, leading to his arrest. Hilton was sentenced for the murders of John and Irene Bryant, and, in a plea deal, agreed to lead authorities to Meredith's remains. Number 3, Luis Braumante. Luis Braumante faced charges including 2 counts of first-degree murder, illegal weapons possession, and stealing a patrol vehicle in October 2014. He shot Deputy Danny Oliver in Sacramento, California, then carjacked another patrol vehicle and fired at Detective Michael Davis and his partner before fleeing. After a manhunt, Luis was found in a building's basement and arrested, leaving 2 officers dead. His 4-year trial was marked by offensive outbursts, including smirking, confessing, and making threats like, "I will kill more." Despite a more subdued demeanor during his verdict, Luis continued his antics, talking and smiling at the victims' families, making gestures, and pointing finger guns while laughing. The jury recommended the death sentence, and at his sentencing, Luis shouted expletives at the victims before being removed. He was ultimately sentenced to death by lethal injection. Number 2, Antoinette Frank. Antoinette Frank, the only woman on Louisiana's death row, was a former police officer in New Orleans. In 1995, her life took a dark turn when she committed a crime that led to her death sentence. Despite evident mental health struggles and failed psychiatric screenings, she managed to join the police force during a turbulent period in the 1990s. Her tenure was marked by indecisiveness, confusion, shyness, and irrational behavior, leading to constant reprimands. In March 1995, Antoinette and her boyfriend, involved in illicit activities, visited a Vietnamese restaurant with horrifying intentions. Recognizing the threat, the owner, who had kept a key from a previous visit, witnessed them opening fire indiscriminately. Their brutal assault resulted in the deaths of 2 restaurant employees and a security guard who was a fellow officer. Antoinette was swiftly sentenced to death. While she acknowledged her role, she vehemently denied other suspected offenses. Her legal efforts have focused on appealing her sentence, primarily arguing her mental state at the time of the crime. Number 1, Daryl Edwards Brooks. Daryl Brooks faced 6 counts of first-degree murder, among other charges, for a tragic event that occurred during the Waukesha Christmas Parade in 2021. Driving a red Ford Escape, he plowed through barriers and into the crowd, resulting in 56 people being run over and 6 deaths, including a child. This wasn't his first run-in with the law. He had a history of charges dating back to 1999, including drug possession and assault. During his trial, Brooks represented himself, leading to a chaotic courtroom. He repeatedly clashed with the judge, claiming sovereign citizen status and arguing about legal procedures. Brooks's behavior was so disruptive that he was often removed from the courtroom. At one point, he even stripped off his clothes and held up placards like a child throwing a tantrum. Despite his antics, the jury found him guilty on all 76 charges. At his sentencing, Brooks showed little remorse, rolling his eyes and behaving disrespectfully. The judge sentenced him to 6 life terms without parole, plus an additional 762 years. Brooks's case serves as a chilling reminder of the consequences of violent and reckless behavior. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.